Set yourself down and let me tell you a story that happened up in the mountains of Letcher County, Kentucky, where Black Mountain rises up like the highest point in the whole state. 445 feet of pure rock and thick forest. This was back in December of 1947, when the snow fell so heavy you couldn't hardly see your hand in front of your face. I was just a boy of 12 back then, son of one of the deacons at the Baptist church in Whitesburg. But there's some things you don't never forget, no matter how many winters pile up on your bones. Now this here story ain't about ghosts or demons. It's about something a whole lot scarier, about what happens when secrets buried deep grow like poison roots through generations. It's about Pastor Richard Crane, who vanished on Christmas Eve, and about a truth that nobody, and I mean nobody, was ready to discover. The preacher had served our congregation for 12 years. Respected man, I tell you, the kind who preached with fire in his heart. But in them last months of 1947, something in him had changed. Mrs. Merrill Johns, his housekeeper for 8 years, she noticed he'd wake up in the middle of the night hollering, "It weren't my fault. I didn't know." Where you at listening to this right now? You in bed, on the road, sitting on the porch? Tell me in the comments, 'cause this story's gonna make you think about the secrets you're carrying. And if you want more tales straight from the heart of Appalachia, go on and subscribe here. What happened that Christmas changed everything, changed how we saw each other, how we understood the past. 'Cause sometimes the truth don't set you free. Sometimes it destroys you. Heavy snow started on December 20th and didn't let up for 3 days straight. Pastor Crane had been acting different the whole month, distracted-like, as if he was carrying some weight nobody else could see. My mama remarked that he looked plumb wore out, like he weren't sleeping proper. Mrs. Merrill mentioned to the church ladies that he'd stay up till all hours reading his Bible by lamplight, and there was them nightmares, always hollering them same words about guilt and not knowing. We reckoned it was about his wife, dead 3 years back in childbirth, along with the baby. The pastor lived in a modest house right next to the church. The place had belonged to his adoptive folks, the Cranes, who'd passed on years before. Mrs. Merrill had herself a little room in the back where she'd stay most nights, especially come winter. She'd only come back to the region about 10 years prior after her own folks died. Nobody remembered her much. She'd left when she was young, and when she returned, it was as the widow Johns, a quiet woman looking for honest work. On December 22nd, Pastor Crane preached on Cain and Abel. It was the most powerful sermon I ever did hear. He spoke about how the blood of thy brother crieth from the ground, and secrets that haunt generations. His voice shook. Cain asked, "Am I my brother's keeper?" But the real question is, what have I done to my brother? The silence in that church was thick as molasses. Several women were dabbing their eyes with handkerchiefs. After the service, when Vera Wilkins, a skilled carpenter who made fine furniture, asked if he was all right, the pastor smiled sad-like. "I'm right where the Lord wants me, Vera, paying what I owe." 3 weeks prior, Vera had gotten herself a peculiar order, a small wooden cross engraved with S.C. When she asked who it was for, the pastor answered, "For somebody who never had a proper name, somebody buried as unknown, but who deserves to be remembered. Several folks had seen the pastor climbing a black mountain at night these past weeks, always alone, always after dark, carrying a lantern. He'd also visit the cemetery near about every night. Always the same old headstone from 1925. Unknown, rest in peace. We figured he was mourning his own lost child. Mrs. Merrill noticed he'd been up in the attic for hours, opening old trunks from his adoptive parents. After that, he got even more troubled. She found him one night, sitting in the dark, tears running down his face. When she asked what was wrong, he said, "Merrill, you ever done something terrible without knowing? Something that, when you finally learn the truth, you realize there ain't no fixing it?" She didn't know what to say. He shook his head. Not even God forgives that. On the night of December 22nd, Mrs. Merrill fixed supper, pork chops and potatoes. He barely touched his food, just stared out the window at the falling snow. When she offered to stay the night, he refused, said he had things to settle on his own, without witnesses. Before she left, she looked back and saw him standing at the window, a dark silhouette against the dim light. That was the last time anybody saw Pastor Richard Crane alive. Christmas Eve morning came cold and white. The church bell didn't ring at 7, the pastor's daily call to prayer. When folks didn't hear that bell, they started wondering. Mrs. Merrill arrived at his house around 9, found the door unlocked, the house cold as a tomb, and no sign of him. The bed untouched, coat and boots in their usual places. But the study was in perfect order, too perfect. The desk empty, except for a Bible opened to Genesis 4:9. Am I my brother's keeper? Every paper, every sermon, all gone. Just that Bible open to that verse. Sheriff Roger Simmons got himself a search party together right quick. Near about every able-bodied man showed up, including my daddy. They spread out across Black Mountain calling the pastor's name, looking for tracks. There weren't no footprints leaving the house after midnight when the snow stopped, but Vera noticed older tracks, half-covered, leading toward the mountain trail. The pastor had left before midnight, whilst the snow was still falling heavy. The search went on all day. They checked the church, the cemetery, old logging roads, the frozen creek. Nothing. Sheriff Simmons started asking uncomfortable questions. Had anybody noticed something unusual? Vera mentioned the nighttime visits to the mountain, the cross engraved with SC, the strange way the pastor said he was paying what he owed. Mrs. Merrill was beside herself, said he'd been acting peculiar ever since he went through the attic 3 weeks back, finding boxes from his adoptive folks. After that, he got tormented. She mentioned he'd asked about her family once, whether she'd had children. When she said no, he looked at her strange-like, as if trying to read something in her face. When the sun started setting, Sheriff Simmons gathered a small group and said they was heading up Black Mountain. Some instinct was pulling him there. If the pastor had been climbing regular, maybe there'd be clues. Up top, following old tracks, they found a camp behind a rock formation. Circle of stones for a fire, wooden crate for a seat, and carved into a tree, sap still sticky. Forgive me, for I have sinned beyond measure. I killed my brother without knowing. Vera pointed at the ground. Many tracks from different times, all from the same boots. The pastor had been coming here regular, but what did it mean about killing a brother? He was an only child. Sheriff Simmons found a metal box in a hollow rock. Inside, documents that would change everything. First, birth certificate from 1905. Not one, two. Twins born to an unwed mother named Merrill May Hutchins. Names Richard Hutchins and Spencer Hutchins. Father listed as unknown. Second, yellowed newspaper clipping from October 1925. Tragedy on Black Mountain. Young man dies in hunting accident. A man about 20 years old, local hermit, found dead at the mountaintop. Body buried as unknown because nobody knew who he was. Third, letters. Dozens of them, feminine handwriting, addressed to my sons, but never sent. They told a story of desperation. A young woman pregnant with twins, abandoned, forced to give birth alone during a snowstorm in January 1905. Sheriff Simmons read one aloud. I held both of you in my arms and knew I couldn't keep both. Didn't have milk enough. Didn't have strength enough. The snow was so deep. Richard, you was the stronger one, cried louder. Spencer, you was so small, so quiet. I thought, God forgive me, I thought you wouldn't last anyhow. I gave Richard to the Cranes, good folks who wanted a baby. And Spencer, I gave you to old Benjamin, the hermit. He said he'd care for you. I didn't have no choice. Vera whispered, Lord have mercy. Merrill Hutchins, Merrill Johns. It's the same woman. There was one more letter, masculine handwriting, recent. From Pastor Crane, I found the truth in the attic. My parents, the Cranes, they kept everything. Birth certificate, letters from my real mother, proof I had a twin brother given to a hermit. But I knew him. God help me. I knew him. In October 1925, I was 20 years old. A man attacked me on Black Mountain. Wild, filthy, long hair and beard hiding his face. He hollered that I'd stolen his life, that I'd had everything whilst he had nothing. We fought. He tried to push me off the cliff. I defended myself. I pushed him first. He fell. Before he died, he whispered, Mama, she chose you. Spencer never had a chance. I didn't understand. I reported it as a hunting accident, helped bury him as unknown. I carried the guilt of taking a life, but I convinced myself it was self-defense. Now I know. I killed my own brother, my twin brother, the brother my mother condemned by giving him to a hermit. I finished what she started, and she's here, Merrill Johns, my housekeeper, my mother. Did she know? Did she know I'd killed Spencer? The letter ended without signature. Sheriff Simmons folded the paper. We need to find the pastor, and we need to talk to Mrs. Merrill Johns. They descended quickly. Around 10 at night, the sheriff sent for Mrs. Merrill. When she arrived, trembling with cold and fear, he placed the birth certificate on the table. Mrs. Hutchins, he said calmly, or should I call you Mrs. Johns, mother of Richard and Spencer Crane? Her face went white as the snow outside. She collapsed in the chair, deep sobs shaking her whole body. He found out, she whispered. After all these years, he finally found out. Mrs. Merrill sat in that chair and told everything, every painful detail. 17 years old in 1905, pregnant and terrified. The traveling preacher who'd gotten her with child had disappeared. Her folks, strict God-fearing people, sent her away. She gave birth alone in an isolated cabin during one of the worst snowstorms that region ever saw. 2 babies, both boys, born minutes apart. I was bleeding something awful, she said, voice breaking. Didn't have food enough. My milk was barely coming in. The snow was so deep, I knew I could only make one trip down the mountain before I passed out. One trip. One baby. She chose Richard because he was bigger, stronger, cried louder. Spencer was small, quiet, barely moved. She figured, God forgive her. He'd probably die anyhow. She wrapped Richard up and went down the mountain, nearly dying in the process. Gave him to the cranes, who promised to love him. But when she got back to the cabin, Spencer was still alive, and old Benjamin the hermit had showed up. He said he'd care for the baby, that he'd always wanted a son. I was too weak to argue, Merrill explained, so I left Spencer with him. She recovered, married a man named Johns who didn't know nothing about the twins, lived in another part of Kentucky. When her husband and folks died, she came back to Letcher County, wanted to be near Richard, see the man he'd become, used her married name, had been gone so long nobody recognized her. When Richard needed a housekeeper, she offered. For 8 years, she lived that lie, caring for her son the only way she could. But I didn't know about Spencer, she said, voice rising. Didn't know he'd survived to adulthood. Didn't know he'd learned the truth. Didn't know he'd sought out Richard, and I sure didn't know that Richard had. She couldn't finish, just wept. Sheriff Simmons asked gently, "When did the pastor find out? When did he confront you?" 3 weeks back. He found the boxes in the attic, the things the cranes kept. He came to me with the birth certificate, with the letters I'd written but never sent. Asked if it was true, if I was his mother. She confessed everything, about the twins, about giving Spencer to old Benjamin, but she didn't know about 1925, didn't know Spencer had sought out Richard, about the fight, about the death. Richard didn't tell me, Merrill whispered. He just looked at me with them eyes full of pain, said he needed time to process it, that he needed to figure out what to do. In the days following, she watched him torture himself. Nightmares got worse. Stopped eating. Climbed the mountain every night. Last night, the night of December 23rd, he finally spoke to me, told me about 1925, about the man who attacked him, about the fight, about the last words. Mama chose you. Told me he'd killed Spencer without knowing who he was. Merrill had broken down, the horrible truth. She'd condemned one son, and the other had finished her work without knowing, both destroyed by her choices. I begged him to forgive me, said it was my fault, not his, that he couldn't blame himself for something he didn't know. But he shook his head, said he had blood on his hands, his brother's blood, and there weren't no forgiveness. Said Cain at least knew what he was doing. He'd killed in ignorance, and that was worse. She tried to convince him not to do nothing rash, but he insisted she'd leave, said he needed to be alone, that he had decisions to make. I didn't know he was gonna. Sheriff Simmons put his hand on her shoulder. We ain't found him yet. There's still hope. But something in his face said he didn't believe it. Vera spoke up. The cross with S.C. It was for Spencer. He was gonna mark his brother's grave. Sheriff Simmons nodded. And I know where we'll find the pastor. They headed out again, straight to the spot where the hunting accident of 1925 had happened. Mrs. Merrill insisted on coming, despite the cold. She needed to know. The climb was brutal, but they kept on. When they reached the rock formation, Sheriff Simmons led them beyond, to the edge of a steep cliff. There, At the bottom, 40 feet down, they saw him. Pastor Richard Crane lay in the snow, motionless. But what made Mrs. Merrill fall to her knees and let out a cry that echoed through the mountains was what lay beside him, the wooden cross engraved with S.C. driven into the snow, and in the pastor's hands clutched against his chest a piece of paper. It took an hour to recover the body. Sheriff Simmons took the paper, protecting it from the snow. It was a letter, the last Richard Crane would ever write. Sheriff Simmons read the letter by lantern light, voice fighting the wind. Mrs. Merrill knelt in the snow beside her son, hand on his cold face, weeping silently. The letter said, "To my congregation, when you read this, I'll have gone to meet my Maker. My birth name was Richard Hutchins. I was born in 1905, one of twin boys. My mother, Merrill Hutchins, was bleeding to death after birthing us during a snowstorm. She made a choice no mother should ever make. She chose me. My brother Spencer was given to a hermit. I was given to the Cranes. I grew up not knowing none of this. Grew up loved, called to serve the Lord. In October 1925, I was attacked by a man on Black Mountain, wild, furious, hollering that I'd stolen his life. We fought. He tried to push me off the cliff. I defended myself. I pushed him first. As he died, he whispered, "Mama chose you. Spencer never had a chance." I reported it as a hunting accident, helped bury him as unknown. I carried the guilt of taking a life, but I convinced myself it was self-defense. 3 weeks ago, I found the truth in the attic. Certificates, letters, proof that the man I killed was Spencer, my twin brother, and more. Mrs. Merrill Johns is Merrill Hutchins, my mother, the woman who's cared for me 8 years, the woman who made the choice that led to Spencer's death. I confronted her. She confessed. Didn't know about 1925. Didn't know Spencer sought me out. That we met on that cliff. That I finished what she started without knowing. There ain't no redemption for what I done. Cain killed Abel knowing. I killed Spencer without knowing. But that don't make it less true that I got my brother's blood on my hands. My mother made an impossible choice in desperation. I don't blame her. When she couldn't claim me as her son, she served me the only way she could. That was love. But I took my brother's life, the brother who'd already been condemned, who grew up in shadows whilst I grew up in light. When he finally came to me, I killed him. There ain't no forgiveness for that. I'm going to where Spencer fell. I'm taking the cross I had made for him. I'll mark it where he died, so he'll finally be remembered. Then I'll join him. I ask only this. Don't judge my mother. She carried this burden alone for 42 years. If you can forgive her, then maybe there's hope for all of us. Bury me beside Spencer. Let us finally be brothers in death. May God have mercy on us all. Pastor Richard Crane, December 24th, 1947. The silence after was absolute, just wind whistling, snow falling, and Mrs. Merrill's muffled sobs. Vera Wilkins spoke, voice hoarse. He didn't have to do this. It weren't his fault. But he knew now, my daddy said, and for a man like Pastor Crane, knowing was enough. They brought the body down the mountain, careful-like, Mrs. Merrill beside him the whole time. The cross came with them. The news spread by Christmas morning. The whole congregation knew about the twins, about the choice, about the tragic meeting in 1925, about the suicide. And surprisingly, there weren't no judgment. Sheriff Simmons read the letter that Christmas afternoon. Everybody crowded in the church. Mrs. Merrill sat in the front pew, face pale but head held high, finally able to stop hiding. When the sheriff finished, there was a long silence. Then, slowly, folks stood up, and they went to Mrs. Merrill, not to accuse her, but to embrace her, to weep with her, to say they understood, that they forgave. My mama was one of the first. She knelt down, held her hands. "You done what you thought you had to do. None of us knows what we'd do in your place. Let us carry this with you now." 2 days after Christmas, we'd done something else before the burial. We exhumed the body from the 1925 grave, the one marked only as unknown, and we gave him a name. 2 graves were dug side by side, 2 headstones placed. One, Pastor Richard Crane, 1905, 1947, beloved pastor and son. The other, Spencer Crane, 1905, 1925, beloved brother, finally known. Between the 2, we drove the wooden cross with SC, representing both brothers. The whole county showed up. Mrs. Merrill stood between the 2 graves, hand on each headstone, finally able to claim both her sons, even if it was too late. In the months following, something changed in our community. Folks started being more honest, more willing to admit when they was struggling, when they'd made mistakes, when they needed help. Mrs. Merrill, now Mrs. Crane, mother of Richard and Spencer, stayed in the house by the church. The new pastor asked her to continue as housekeeper. She accepted, but now with her head held high. She visited the graves daily. When she died 15 years later, we buried her between her 2 sons. The headstone, Merrill May Crane, 1888 to 1962, beloved mother, finally at peace. 3 graves in a row, a family finally reunited. Black Mountain stopped being seen as a cursed place. It became a place of reflection, where folks went when they had hard decisions, when they needed clarity about secrets and shame. And every Christmas Eve since then, we read Pastor Crane's letter aloud. A sacred tradition, a reminder that we're all broken, we all carry things we're scared to share, and we all need grace. I think about Pastor Crane often, especially now that I'm old. He climbed that mountain trying to find redemption in a world without easy answers. He never preached that final sermon he planned, but his death preached something more powerful about the cost of secrets, the weight of truth, and the power of forgiveness. Because here's what I learned. Secrets isolate us, keep us from being truly known and loved. And grace, the kind that looks at somebody's worst mistake and says, "I see you and I still love you," that's the most powerful force in the world. Mrs. Merrill made an impossible choice in 1905. Richard made a tragic choice in 1925. Both carried the weight till it destroyed them. But our congregation chose different. We chose forgiveness. We chose understanding. We chose to carry the burden together. So if you're carrying something heavy, something you're scared to tell, know this: you ain't alone. We all got our mountains to climb, our truths to wrestle with, our shame to lay down. And there's freedom waiting on the other side of honesty. Not the easy freedom of forgetting, but the real freedom of being known completely and still being loved. The legend lives on in these mountains, passed down generation to generation. The Christmas the preacher never came home. The Christmas we learned that love sometimes looks like sacrifice. that truth sometimes comes at a terrible cost, and that grace is always bigger than our shame. That's the story, friend. That's what happened in Letcher County, Kentucky, in the winter of 1947. And if it makes you think about your own life, about what you're hiding, then maybe Pastor Crane's final sermon is still being preached, even now, all these years later. God rest his soul, and the soul of the brother he never knew, and the soul of the mother who loved them the only way she knew how.